Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Ryle, and I teach fiction and creative nonfiction here in the writing program at Penn. And I'd like to welcome you to the Applebaum Editors and Publishers Series. This is the third installment this semester. We are tying in the series with my English 115 advanced fiction writing class. I had an idea this year to bring in 4 different literary magazines to our class. Our class is basically a regular fiction workshop where students work on their own work and we workshop it. But for a reading list, we're using the content of 4 different magazines, and the editors are visiting us throughout the semester. I got this idea because last year at this time, for my advanced fiction class, we did a little program in which we adopted a literary magazine, and the magazine I chose was One Story. And one of the side benefits of adopting the magazine was that an editor from One Story would come and visit our class, and that ended up being Marie-Helene Bertino, who is a wonderful, it was a great visit. She was a wonderful influence on the class, and she was so generous with her critiquing of their work and with her just sort of giving a glimpse into what the world of being an editor is like, an editor in New York. And she's also a native of Philadelphia, so it was kind of a visit back home for her. It was terrific. It was the highlight of our semester, and that's what gave me the idea to do this semester. So so far we've brought in Apiary, which is a very young magazine in the city, is founded 2 years ago by some recent graduates, and they've been very successful. They do a lot of programming in the literary community involving writers from like all stages of literary life in the community. They were here in October, and then a few weeks ago we brought in Painted Bride Quarterly, which is a very well-established magazine. It's now sponsored by Drexel University, but it's independent in terms of its literary function as a magazine. They've been around since 1974, so we're able to show the contrast between a very established magazine and a very new magazine. This time we've brought in Marie-Helene, one of the editors of One Story, and if you're not familiar with One Story, it's a nonprofit magazine, and it features one great short story mailed to subscribers, and the only way you can get it is by subscription or now through Kindle, but that's a new thing, every 3 weeks. So when you're a subscriber, every 3 weeks you get a little envelope, it's not very large, in the mail addressed to you. You open it up and here's your story. The mission is to save the short story by publishing in a friendly format that allows readers to experience each story as a standalone work of art and a simple form of entertainment. One Story is designed to fit into your purse or your pocket, I guess people with large pockets, and into your life. That's from their website. Because they like a challenge, they publish each writer one time only. This prevents them from relying on a stable of writers and helps them to find new and exciting voices. Between September and June, all writers, that's everyone in this room and all of your friends, can submit their work. Since launching in 2002, One Story has grown to over 10,000 subscribers, and I'll bet there's even more as of this meeting here. Many of those stories have won awards, and many One Story writers have gone on to publish their first or third or 10th books. Mm-hmm. But they say what keeps them going is the community they have created. They are unusual among literary magazines. Well, I think this is also true of Apiary in that they stay in contact with their writers and they really do support them, even though they publish them only once. And I'd like to introduce Marie-Helene. Marie-Helene Bertino has been a music writer, a muralist, a diner waitress, and a singer in a band. She's also been called a fashion icon, editor extraordinaire, and teacher of the masses. And that's
Your
my
phone.
phone.
Is doing something.
However, her heart is all fiction writer. Her stories have appeared or are forthcoming in the Pushcart Prize Anthology 23. I can read Roman numerals. The North American Review. She won the Kurt Vonnegut Award in 2007, the Mississippi Review, Inkwell, and many other magazines. She received an MFA from Brooklyn College, where she edited the Brooklyn Review. She is a recipient of the 2011 Center for Fiction in New York City Emerging Writers Fellowship and is currently working on a novel and a children's book. She lives in Brooklyn, where she is learning guitar. Welcome.
Thank you. Go Eagles. It's really, really nice to be here. I feel like you've said everything that I needed to say, so I think my work here is done.
Okay.
It's nice to meet all of you. Do I answer questions?
I guess you could talk a little bit about, I know you're really good at talking, so if you want to just tell us a little bit about, I mean, we've seen you in action.
Okay.
Just tell us a little, and then we'll just throw it up into questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. How about I tell you a little about how I got from Philadelphia to Brooklyn and editing one story. I grew up here in Northeast Philly, and I went to school at Villanova. I'm sorry, I couldn't afford Penn. And I got an undergrad degree in English and then traveled for a little bit. I always wanted to be a writer. I was actually a poetry student. I was a poet until age 25, when I realized I was total crap at writing poetry. And I didn't want to stop writing, so I switched to fiction. And that was really when I realized what my calling was, so to speak. Fiction writing is where my heart is. And in the bio that says I was a muralist here. I supported myself through Villanova, working at the Villanova Diner. And I worked at Tiffany's Diner, too, on the Roosevelt Boulevard in Northeast Philly, 24-hour diner. So some of you may have frequented that place late at night or early in the morning. And I painted children's murals for bedrooms on the main line, of people on the main line, for money while I was at Villanova.
So you weren't part of the Philadelphia Mural Arts Project?
No, and that's why I wanted to say that, because Philadelphia has such a wonderful, beautiful mural association that I wouldn't want you to think I was good enough for that, because I wasn't. I just did it for private homes. And then I moved to New York. I got involved with One Story 6 years ago as a reader, an editorial assistant, and actually one of the things I like to tell writers who are just starting out is if you can get involved in a literary magazine as a reader or an editorial assistant or an intern, to do it, because it's absolutely invaluable experience, and I learned so much about professional writing and editing just by reading 15 stories a week from the slush pile. Philly has such great literary magazines like Painted Bride and Apiary, which I found out about last year when I visited, and I've been keeping up with Apiary, and just such a good-hearted magazine, and I'm a huge fan. And then I went to Brooklyn College for my MFA, and we can talk about MFA programs and the pros and cons of going and which ones. And I made my way up the ladder, so to speak, at One Story until I was the associate editor. And yeah, I think that's it, right? Okay.
Great. Well, I'm going to throw this open to questions, but first I have a question for you, which is that, can you explain, we've had a few different types of editors come and talk to us, and it seems like there's an extreme end of the spectrum in terms of supportive writers, and it seems to me that maybe One Story is at the more supportive end. When we talked to Painted Bride, the question was put to the editor about how stories were supported if they were brought in and felt to be not quite ready for publication. And basically the answer was, we really are only in the position to think about copy editing.
Right.
We want the story to be completely developed when it arrives. That's what we heard. So it seems to me that the process at One Story is really different. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think most literary magazines are like Painted Bride in that just people do not have the time anymore to edit. So the very kind of old-fashioned way of an editor holding an author's hand through a very long, deliberate editorial process is uncommon now. But it is one that One Story still participates in. That's one of the many reasons why I love working at One Story. So we will have a story come in, and we will see something spectacular or extraordinary in either the language or the plot, or something will strike us. And if it's not quite there, we will email the author and say, are you interested in revising with me with an eye toward publication? And that can be sometimes a months-long process, several revisions over email. And I mean, most of us are doing this as a labor of love. So this is in our spare time. And it's a learning process both for, I've learned so much from the authors, but it is very uncommon. I've been published as, my own writing, because I'm also a writer. I've been published in 8 literary magazines, 8 professional literary magazines, I would say, and none of them have edited me. And it's not that I didn't need editing. I would edit myself, but it's that they just don't have the time. And it's also, priority. priorities. And, most literary magazines are just struggling to stay afloat, so they have to spend their time elsewhere, which I completely understand. So one story, though, and maybe it is because it's just one story at a time. We have a little more time than others as well to focus on that one story. And each story literally comprises the issue. So it has to be that much more autonomous and that much more full and rich. So, it's also kind of necessary for us to do.
Would you say that there are writers whose stories would not have made it to publication, or who would not have been able to develop their work to the extent that it has without the guidance from the editorial staff?
Are there writers that wouldn't have been published in our literary magazine?
Or stories that would not have seen it to publication? I mean, I just
Absolutely,
wonder if
yes.
you could explain the impact that you've had on the lives of these writers. Not to make you cheat your own
tremendous
work.
impact. No. I mean, one of the great things is that I have been able to see a story in its kind of embryonic state and pull it through. And I think it would have slipped through the cracks. One of them I'm thinking of specifically was called Bar Joke, Arizona. And it was written by a very young Philadelphia writer. I think he was like Sam Allingham, an amazing, wonderful, talented, eccentric writer. And he was like 21, 22 when he sent that story in. And I think it would have been easy for that story to slip through the cracks in other magazines, but there was something in it that I just loved, and I pulled it out of the slush. And we worked with him, and it ended up getting a special mention for the Pushcart, and it did really well. And I don't know, I don't know that other magazines would have worked with him on that, like that. But I can't say. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they would have.
What sort of changes? I mean, were you helping him with?
Oh, before you, not for amplification purposes, but for archival
For
purposes.
archival purposes.
Ooh.
What kind of changes did you work with him on? I'm just interested in what you saw that needed to be done and how he was able to do it.
It was just figuring out where he wanted to go with the story and helping him get to it. I want to say that for sure, because we don't suggest changes that make it more marketable or make it more mainstream or it was more carving out what was already there. And I know that the probably sounds so vague, but it was, let me tell you about the story. Bar Joke, Arizona. It's a riff on the famous joke, a man walks into a bar. And in Sam's brilliant story, the first line is, a man walks into a bar. And then he has this exchange with the bartender, and they both decide they're too tired for this joke, so let's just have a drink at a bar and have an actual interaction. Then all of the other characters in bar jokes, like a duck, a rabbi, they all walk into the same bar. And then it just becomes a night of drinking with all of these archetypal characters. Like that little man under the hat, like that guy's there, and a bear, and a rabbi, and they're all drinking together. Then at the end, and this is where, I swear to God, this is building to something. At the end, the duck that has walked into the bar stands on the table and delivers this 2-page long, absolutely exquisite monologue. And it's really sad, and it's about the love of his life. And at the end, everyone is sleeping and in various states of drunkenness. And it's just this really offbeat, beautiful story. And we didn't have much to do with it, but it was just carving out the emotional tracking and impact of the night of drinking leading to that beautiful singular monologue. So with that one specifically, it was more just fine-tuning the progress and of the story and the adding one thing at a time to achieve a resonance that was there in its natural form, but wasn't quite carved out. Does that make sense? Hello.
Hi. Just a dozen questions.
12? Okay, excellent. Number one.
How many submissions do you get? How many hours a week do you spend? How many of the submissions do you read? And then do all your readers, are they a part of the final editorial process? Things like that.
No, all the readers are not part of the final editorial process. We have 10 readers, around 10 readers. They read 20 stories a week from the slush pile. So when I was a reader, I was reading 15 to 20 a week. I'm trying to think of what your questions were. Oh, how many do we get a week? Last I checked, it was 120 stories a week. So it's a considerable amount of submissions. One thing I like to say is that well, Smith is different, but for most of our authors that we do publish, many times it's their 6th, 7th, or 8th submission to us. That seems to surprise a lot of people. And but it's good to know that if you do get rejected, keep trying, because you're growing as a writer as the time is going by and as you're submitting, and don't get discouraged. It's good to know that you shouldn't just give up on one story or any literary magazine after an initial rejection. But let's say one of our readers pulls something out of the slush. They bring it to the editorial meeting, which is every week, and if it's accepted, then one editor takes charge of it and leads that author through the process, and it's that editor's responsibility. So it's not a group thing, although Hannah Tinty, our editor-in-chief, normally has this, and me in some cases, has a sense of all the stories as they're being brought along. So yeah.
Just to clarify what his question, so the process is that the slush is read by these 10 readers, and then if they are to pull one out of the slush, then it will go to a smaller editorial board?
Pretty much, yep. Sometimes they will send it to myself or another reader just to get a second opinion before they bring it to the meeting. But I train, or I don't anymore, but I used to be the one who trained the readers. So, they read the whole story, and they are very studied, very good readers, which I'm happy to be able to say with complete confidence. Hello.
Hi. Does it ever happen that you're going through the editorial process and it doesn't make it to publication?
No. We email the author, would you be interested in revising with an eye toward publication? And we are very, what's the word? We make sure that we don't guarantee publication for that reason, because I do know people who have had stories accepted only to be rejected after a revision or two at other literary magazines. We make sure that the author knows exactly what's going on. That said, we have never not published a story after that. But we just we are all writers too, so we like to be as respectful as possible.
Does it take longer sometimes, some stories?
Oh, God, yes.
I would think so.
Let me think about that. Yeah. Number Stations, which just recently won a PEN Award for short story. I edited this with Smith Henderson. I barely had to edit it. I mean, it was already so far along. It was just almost in its whole state. Fire Season, another one that's right here. Amelia Kahaney went through about 5 or 6 revisions, but there have been some that have been 3 or 4 months. I mean, it just stays on the little bulletin board for half a year.
One Story has a blog. You can't read content online, but you can read their blog, which is actually very informative, and there's a lot of content on there. And I've read some of the descriptions and interviews with authors about what they've gone through, and I'm very impressed by the amount of rolling up. It's almost like a workshop, except it's a one-on-one process.
That's right. Cody Smith, another one of our authors who wrote a story called Hurt People, I worked with him, told me it was like a real-world MFA, that he learned more doing that than he did during his real MFA. I mean, that was a very nice thing of him to say, but yeah, it's like a class. It's like a master class sometimes.
Right.
Can you give me an idea of the word count?
Let's see. We say that the minimum is 3,000 and the maximum is 10,000. We are not really flexible with the minimum word count because it is, so autonomous, but we are flexible with the 10,000 words. We can publish a longer story.
You can look at these 2 stories. Oh, wrong one. Well, anyway, you can look at various issues of One Story and see that they really are different.
Yeah.
Some are quite long, 30 pages, and some are pretty short. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Since you only do one story that kind of defines the issue for each particular one, is there anything specific that you look for in each issue, like in particular, or do you try to really change it up?
Genre-wise? Yeah. That's another thing that I really like about one story. From issue to issue, it can be science fiction-y to more straight literary fiction to, right, like
This is science fiction.
Life Among
Yeah.
the Terranauts, to more absurdist. So as far as genre, I mean, we do not publish children's fiction. We do not publish, what else? There are certain experimental pieces, unfortunately, we can't publish because it wouldn't hold down an entire issue, which is sad for me because I love experimental fiction, but our format dictates a lot of what we can accept. So to answer your question, the autonomy of a certain story, the richness, the fullness, it has to comprise an entire issue. So there's a certain quality of scope that the story has to have. And then as far as genre goes, doesn't matter.
Just to piggyback on Carmen's question, is there, when you're creating your schedule for the publication, do you consider, like, for example, well, we just published a story that is sort of literary science fiction, so now we'll go to something that's more domestic literary, or do you have, like, do you try to create a sort of series in which there's a variety, or does that not come into it?
It does a little bit, not as far as what we accept, but in the order in which we publish.
Yeah.
So we'll accept 6 stories, and then if we just had a science fiction one, then we'll space it out so that the next science fiction one is a few issues down, perhaps. But, you know, nothing that prohibits a story from being accepted.
From your own publishing and from your editing, how do you know when, you've submitted enough to a certain journal? You said, 6 to 7 times authors are sending you their work. So how do you say, okay, you really need a lot more work, maybe take off 5 years or something, versus, okay, your 6th one was a lot better than your 5th one. Could you talk just about, the perseverance?
For myself as a writer?
Or as an editor?
Well, okay. So I am of 2 minds to answer that question, because my first thought was, is this being recorded? Because there are certain literary magazines that I have absolutely X'd off my Excel spreadsheet that I use to track where I send stories that I will never
The editor
submit
from
to
Painted
again.
Bride said all kinds of things I don't think she wanted repeated.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I want to be honest. Okay, so let me answer it as the editor of one story, which I am. One thing that's, okay, here's something that's useful to know. We have varying levels of rejection. So if you get something personal from us, that's our way of telling you, please submit to us again. If we ask you to submit again, we want you to submit again. So, and I believe even in one of them it says, we hope that you will be encouraged by this note. And that is very specific. We want you to be encouraged and keep sending us stuff. Knowing that, as a writer, if I send to a place and they write me, we hope you will be encouraged by this note, and send us something else, that would signal to me as a writer, I will send them something again. So now segueing to me as a writer, I mean, let's see, how many times have I been rejected by The New Yorker? 13? From the time I was 12 years old when I started sending them my poetry. My first letter to The New Yorker was, Dear The New Yorker, I can't wait for you to I was 12 years old. I can't wait for you to publish this poem. Please and thank you. Marie-Helene Bertino, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was so excited. I thought that's all I had to do. And basically my cover letters are basically the same now, I would say, to all the literary magazines. Like, Dear Glimmer Train. So as a writer, I've been rejected by, the best magazines over and over and over and over again. That said, if I keep receiving the same piece of paper that's not even a whole piece of paper, that's like this big and it says Dear Writer and it's like half off the page, and then after a while, I mean, I'm not a glutton for punishment that much, so I'll stop. But also, Glimmer Train is my example of, I don't submit to them again. I mean, I finally realized that they don't publish what I write. And so after reading their magazine, and they have a Family Matters contest, like every 3 months it seems, and I don't write like that. So finally I had to say, I can't submit to Glimmer Train anymore. So people say the best way to know if your work is good for a magazine is to read it. People say that all the time. I don't like that because you don't have the money to buy these literary magazines or get the subscription that they want you to get so you can become familiar with them. I mean, as a writer, I don't know about you guys, but writing wasn't always paying my bills. So I didn't have, $25 to buy like the Mississippi Review or a subscription or whatever. That said, you could go to Barnes & Noble and stand there for an hour and just page through, and which would be a great way to spend an afternoon. And I would recommend that.
Or a library.
Or library, of course, yeah. So I do recommend familiarizing yourself with the literary magazine, but also familiarizing yourself with the culture around the literary magazine. I mean, literary magazines have certain reputations for a reason. Ours happens to be a pretty friendly one, and that's good. But there are others that really do not publish from the slush pile.
Right,
and
they
you
have a
to know
slush
that.
pile, but they really are publishing stuff.
Famous authors or friends. And I can speak to you about which literary magazines they are when I'm not being recorded or I'm not speaking into a
my class.
microphone. But one
That will not be
story,
recorded.
one story
Yeah.
is content-based, period. Did that answer your question at all? I feel like you asked me what I was reading, and then I went on a tangent.
It's a multi-tiered question because it's really just because, don't throw yourself at a brick wall by submitting, to a magazine that is never going to publish your style of writing. But also, it also even pays to go. If you look at Best American Short Stories that comes out every year, there's a little number that tells you how many stories they publish per year, and it could be a well-known magazine, but they may only publish 10 stories a year. And when you consider how many submissions they're getting, what are the chances? You might want to, and also there are other ways, you come to a meeting like this, you meet the editor, they know you a little bit, maybe there'll be some kind of more careful reading of your work. I don't know. That's something you can do also. But you could maximize your chances by submitting to magazines that actually look at more stories than some that only publish a couple a year.
Yeah, I could very easily spout off a list of literary magazines that I recommend to all my students and to any emerging writer I come across that I just have such great faith in their editors and their the Indiana Review and the Mississippi Review and the Missouri Review.
Someone in one of my classes last year got a story accepted by Indiana Review.
By Indiana?
Yeah, just
I
out of the
love-
slush pile.
And West Branch, which is Bucknell's literary magazine. I have a story coming out next month in them, and I have great things to say about those. So, you just keep your ears
And
open.
Painted Bride Quarterly has a very democratic, they were here before, they explained, which sort of boggles my mind, that every story is read by every person who is reviewing it when they have the meeting. So it's it's a tremendous amount of reading they have. Is that right? That's what they said. We had to make her repeat it. It was that's why they can't edit anything. It has to be perfect. So.
Wow.
But they take everyone seriously, so that's pretty unusual. And so apiary also for 2 local
That's
magazines.
so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paris Review also has 2 levels of reading before it gets to, I don't know if that's a pro or a con for the writer.
Yeah. I have known people who were very encouraged by Paris Review, only not to make it to the top level, but,
Yeah. Hello again.
Hi. How did being a reader affect your own writing? Was it hard to get back into your own head, sort of, or was it inspiring, or did it have a big effect?
It did. It did have a big effect. I have to say it was strangely encouraging because I was reading 15 stories a week, and I realized how many of them were not right for the magazine, and how many of them were
terrible.
questionable.
Yeah.
Were questionable. I couldn't believe it. Everyone in America thinks that they can write a novel, and everyone in America thinks they can write a short story. And that's awesome. That's the great thing about writing, that everyone thinks they can do it. And then when I was reading all their efforts, it was so funny how many archetypes and common themes would spring up, such as someone coming of age by a Midwestern lake whose mostly the mother has cancer. I read that story 15 times a month, and it was good to know that story was being written and rewritten, because then if I ever wanted to write a story about a parent with cancer, I would know what has already been written about it, and so I can make mine different, let's say. Or I could just avoid it altogether. Because I would never say, don't write a story about someone coming of age on a Midwestern lake. I would just say, if you're going to write it, make it amazing, make it original, make it extraordinary, make it an alien coming of age on a Midwestern lake or whatever. So I can't even tell you, it was so amazing realizing, like, okay, hey, I'm all right. I'm all right. Like, I'm going to keep doing this. And other people, though, have said that discouraged them. So it's your particular persona, I would say.
I think you said 120 stories a week, which would be about 360 per, because you publish every 3 weeks. Do you find that you end up getting a backlog? I mean, regardless of what you just said, are there enough good stories that are you sort of a year ahead now in publication, or
We're not a year ahead, but we do have things in the hopper all the time, probably around 5 or 6 stories that we're working on at any given time. Yeah, but that also doesn't preclude us from accepting anything. So that I wouldn't even worry about that. Yeah. Yeah, I would say like 5 or 6. However, there are some months where we have 1 and we're scrambling and the upper level editors are going into the slush to like read through and pull one out. So it varies.
I have a question. So years ago, I went to the AWP convention in Chicago. Like it's going to be this year, and
Bye,
it's the only
Carmen.
it's the only time I've been there. But this new magazine, One Story, and I took some of them home and actually subscribed to it. This was a long time ago, like probably like more than 10 years ago, or when it was a new magazine. Can you talk about, because I thought this is great, I wonder if they can keep it going, and it looks like there's been some success.
Just barely.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's a really tough climate to have any arts organization, but a literary magazine. So can you just talk a little bit about the history, how the magazine started? I know that it's an LLC now. How is it here? Like what kind of behind the scenes efforts were done to start the magazine and to keep it going and to keep it and to have it and to get it to the level that it is today and to keep it for the future?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I guess that's how I should have begun. The way that One Story was founded was right after 9/11 in New York. The publisher, Mary Beth Batcha, and the editor-in-chief, Hannah Tinty, after 9/11, they said there was a climate in New York that was like, if you've ever wanted to do anything, if you ever had a pipe dream, now's the time to do it because life is short. And they had wanted to start a literary magazine that published one story at a time, and they said, now's the time to do it. So that's how it originated. I think one thing that helps us stay afloat in these troubled times is that the overhead is so small on our magazine. And so that has helped us a lot as we've seen magazines and literary magazines go out of business. But like I said, it's been a labor of love. Hannah and Mary Beth were not making any money and both had to have day jobs throughout the entire course of our history. We are going into our 10th year, still going strong. Now, the magazine went from just barely paying for itself to being able to afford us opportunities to offer like a summer workshop for emerging writers. And we've gotten more grants. We got a grant last year from Amazon and the Kindle. And so there have been these lovely attendant programs that we've been able to start, and that's helped us out a lot as well.
Are you spending a lot of, or are members of the staff, do you have a staff that's paid, or is it all volunteer?
The readers are volunteer, and the rest of us, we get small stipends. And there's only one full-time staff member, and that's our managing editor.
Do you have someone who's doing development, writing grants, and that sort of thing?
That would be the managing editor,
Okay.
and she's
Yeah.
full-time salaried, and she's the only one.
Great.
Ernest Hemingway started, the great For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Farewell Arms. He wrote, for instance, The Killers, The Old Man and the Sea short stories. Have you ever had short story writers who have gone on to write good books, very good novels, for example, such as he wrote short stories
Yes.
initially?
What a great question. I'm thinking. let's see. I'm thinking we have many writers who were published in one story who have gone on to write really incredible novels, and who are continuing to do that. Or, novelists, and now I'm completely blanking on, he wrote Beanball, and he runs the UC Irvine MFA program, and I cannot think of his name right now. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. But he's a very well-known novelist who has given us a story to publish.
Someone Google it quickly.
Beanball, why am I forgetting this? Ugh. So yes, a lot of our number stations, for instance, Smith Henderson is right now working on a novel. And another one of our writers, Irwyn, who had a story that was being developed for a very long time, was just signed to a huge book contract, and his book will be coming out soon. And so yeah, one of Hannah's, the editor's, favorite thing is to see the authors move from short story to novel and back. I mean, some of them are just short story writers and have no interest in writing novels, but yeah. Yeah. It's very true. And it also brings up something that a topic that can generate really heated debate of whether or not you can be both a short story writer and a novelist, or is there always one form that you do better than the other? I think Ernest Hemingway is an example, a very rare example of someone who can do both just as well. And I'd be happy to argue that, but I think that's pretty.
This piggybacks onto an interesting topic. It seems to me you refer to them as our writers, and I guess it's an ever burgeoning list, 10 years worth of, every 3 weeks of our writers. So, can you explain a little bit about how you maintain the community of writers and what your relationship is with the writers that you've published, and also how you foresee being able, as the population of this heaven increases, how will you be able to sustain the relationship with them? Like, what is the community of writers like?
Well, for a very long time, we had a monthly reading series, and we would have readings for our authors. So if you got published in one story, we published a Q&A with each of the authors on our website as each story comes out. And we very much see it as a stable or a family of writers. And we'll throw readings when we're in their hometown. We'll throw readings at AWP for them, because we don't want to publish them and then forget about them. We also wanted to help them out as they do go on to hopefully very successful
Do they ever
careers.
give back to you?
I mean, not yet, but I'm still waiting. No, do they give back to us?
To give back to one story. I mean, if they've
Yeah.
gone on to some success, is there any?
I'm sure they do in a million different ways I'm completely forgetting about right now, but none of them are Stephen King yet, I would say. So I'm sure
Probably
they're just
not gonna
worried about.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see. I mean, I hope so. But I don't know. We just like to burgeon. We like to engender a community that helps all of us move to the next thing, and that's always kind of what it's been about. But no, it is like I do always say our authors.
Yes, and it does seem like it's a very sort of nurturing concept, an umbrella.
I said to Hannah all the time, God, I wish I was a one-story author, because I've been published in literary magazines that have published me and then forgotten who I was,
sure.
and it's so. And I would love to have a Q&A, and I would love to have a reading thrown for me in my hometown, and so yeah, no, I'm incredibly jealous of one-story authors.
Can you, in terms of your outreach, can you talk a little bit about your summer program and things that you do for emerging writers who may not be one-story authors yet?
Sure. So this was my pet project, because one of the things I'm very passionate about is helping out writers who are just starting out. Because when I was just starting out, and I think we're all still just starting out, the practical advice was something that I just needed so much of. And so we started this Emerging Writers Workshop, which is every summer for a week at our offices on the Gowanus in Brooklyn. And it's a practical week of workshops. And by that I mean every morning they study with me or another writer on their own stories. So that's a traditional workshop. Every afternoon they have a craft lecture with another writer living in New York or near us visiting or whatever, on an element of craft, on a specific element of craft that's helpful, such as character and plot and structure, and something that is very specific that you can leave knowing something more about how to craft a story. Then every evening, it's a panel with agents one night or professional editors another night, and then we try to have an established writer for one of the nights. It's normally Thursday evening, who just spends the entire night talking to them and answering any questions they want. And it's basically an intimate evening with a professional writer who can just, talk shop with these students and say, well, this is how I did it, and it's very down to earth. And I felt like, so I put together this workshop, and I planned the format of it, because I felt like I didn't know of a workshop that was doing that was really saying to emerging writers, this is how you go from sending your work to the New Yorker with a cover letter that reads, "Dear the New Yorker, I love you, love Marie, here's a picture of my cat," to a professional sounding cover letter, and after you get a battery of publications under your belt and things like that. So that's the Emerging Writers Workshop. We also do smaller things in the community. Like last year we had a subway series where we stood outside the subway during rush hour, subways all over Brooklyn and Manhattan, and we handed out free issues of one story and invited them to an event at the Brooklyn Book Festival, which we also are always at, promoting literacy. So I stood at the Atlantic Pacific Street Station subway stop in Brooklyn, which is a very, very busy thoroughfare, and handed out one stories all morning and did not get hit in the face, which I thought I certainly would. When you interrupt New Yorkers or anybody during the commute, I said, I'm like, this is going to be the dumbest thing we've ever done. We're all going to get coffees thrown in our faces. But they were surprisingly nice, so it was good.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about the literary community in Brooklyn?
Yeah. And I'm in Philadelphia right now, and I'm from Philadelphia, and I'm very proud of being from Philadelphia. I'm a Northeast Philly girl, and that means something to me. And I don't know if any of you are actually from Philadelphia, because I realize that Penn students are not all from Philly.
How many people are from Philadelphia?
Awesome. Awesome. We can talk about whether you're from the suburbs and what part later, and if we know anybody in common. But I'm from Philly, so when I talk about Brooklyn, there's always a caveat, like, I am not a New Yorker. That said, I had to move to New York because Philly doesn't, at the time when I was here, did not have an MFA program and didn't have the publications or the publishing opportunities that I moved to New York to find. And I hate saying that because I wish that wasn't true. But the reason I live in New York is because that's where publishing is. And so the community in Brooklyn specifically, all the writers didn't have money to live in Manhattan, so they all migrated to Brooklyn. They've made things like One Story and reading series and other literary magazines to create that community. So I have found in Brooklyn the community that I was looking for, that was very supportive and down to earth and helpful to one another. And I was saying to Karen earlier before we started, if Philly ever did have a really wonderful MFA, like, I want them to have a more, besides the Kelly Writers House, there wasn't anything here when I was here. And I want it to get better and better and better because I want to come home in a certain way. And I want to, be able to have readings here and bring people here, and I want it to have its own thing. And I hope someday that will happen. I think Kelly Writers House is amazing for that reason. But Brooklyn's great.
What
for
are some of
writers.
the magazines and do the magazines interact with each other? Is there, what's
Yeah,
going on?
Electric Literature, who is going to be here, I think, soon.
I think the 28th of November.
20th of November. Right after Thanksgiving. The editors of Electric Literature, I went to Brooklyn College with them. I know them very well, and we do events together, and are always in contact as far as authors. And we've published some of the same authors. And so there's Electric Literature. There's Opium Magazine that's having their literary deathmatch tonight. We're always involved with
They're having
them.
one in Brooklyn because there's also one happening here.
No, I know,
World
that's what I
Cafe.
meant. At the Painted Bride?
At the World Cafe, Painted Bride.
Oh, it's the World Cafe tonight.
Painted
right?
Bride Quarterly is sponsoring it locally. Jamie Lee Jocelyn will be representing Penn. I think it's at 7 p.m.
I don't know what time it
8.
is.
8. Thank you. 8 p.m. World Cafe, which is right down on Walnut Street.
Was that God?
God's participating.
So the literary deathmatch is tonight, and that's Todd Zuniga from Opium, and they're also based in Brooklyn. and who else?
Oh, right. They are the ones that sponsor literary. That's right. I knew
That's
that.
right.
Right.
Yes, Opium
All over,
Magazine
yeah.
does that. And up until recently, Open City, which was another great literary magazine there, they just recently went out of business. And but no, yeah, we all know each other because just through events like this.
I wish you would talk a little bit about the aesthetic choices because although this magazine at first glance is very plain, actually it seems to me that a lot of beautiful design decisions have gone into it. For one thing, there's like varying color from issue to issue, which is, but also, you know, you have a really beautiful typeface on the front, and there's like certain design decisions in terms of like, you know, the spacing and the font or typeface that you used. And I can tell that, you know, I mean, although there's a similarity from issue to issue, I noticed that we use a different typeface on the cover of each one, and so someone's thinking about that, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Normally, the person who's thinking about that, her name is Pei-Ling Liu, and she is a contributing editor, and she's been laying out the magazine since it started, basically. And then it was transferred to a woman named Tanya Ray. So basically, it's the managing editor's job. And then Tanya was laying it out for a while. And Pei-Ling and Tanya both think, okay, number stations and what is the story about, and decide what the font will be. It's always like, what font is it going to be and what color is it going to be? And that decision is left up to them. And the color normally has something to do with something in the story. So number stations, the main character talks about orange jackets, prisoners. And so that's why it's orange. And fire season is pink because of the fire. And so normally the color does correspond with
And
something.
there's a huge range of colors because I've got red ones and I've got
They're all over the place, yeah.
purple, different shades in between. Yeah.
It's like a veritable rainbow of literature. Really is. Anything else? No? Sure.
Oh, there.
He's snoozing back there.
I just want to tell you how much I love the magazine.
Oh,
It's so
great.
easy to read.
Thank
and so many of the stories have just been wonderful. I don't love all of them, but
I know.
I like having read them.
That's
even if
great.
I
Well,
don't
thank
love
you very much. I don't love all of them either. And there's some that I just get so excited about. Nephilim, I think you just had it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Nephilim makes me cry. I did not edit this, and I didn't read it until it was published. And I read it at my kitchen table. Gosh, it's so short. And I read it at my kitchen table very, in half an hour or whatever. And I was just, it was so moving. But from that story to number stations, I mean, it's just so different. And one thing I love about, the way that we publish is that you can have a favorite, and I mean, I love number stations too, but it is different from one to the next. There are some I like less than others, but and I forgot to say this when you were talking about the layout. Up until recently, we had absolutely no advertising, and that was deliberate. Now we do have advertising, but it is, and we're trying to make it very tasteful and small.
Where is it?
It's not on any of these. It's
Oh.
been recent. Where is it? I'm like, it's so small you can't even see it. It's on page 10. It's in invisible ink. You have to hold it up to a black light to see who sponsored it. But we didn't want anything distracting from the story itself, so we didn't have advertising.
Would you say that there is, I know you'll say that there is not, but I'll ask anyway. Would you say that there is a typical story? I mean, there is a certain, even the
Absolutely not.
there is a certain thread of realism.
Yeah.
I think even the science fiction stories and even the magic realist stories have a kind of realistic sensibility to them. I mean, when you were talking about throwing yourself at Glimmer Train and then you realize, oh, they're never going to print my work.
Yeah.
Do you think that you could sort of define, although there's no typical story and they're very different in some ways, is there, and you said that we don't take experimental stories, for example, or highly experimental stories. Would you say they tend to be realist stories, or is there a way of?
I would say that they normally arc in traditional ways, no matter what kind of story they are.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say that. Things normally, I'm trying to be as practical as I can right now with the thinking of it, because you're right. There is a certain thread, because to achieve autonomy, it normally is something happens in threes. It normally is characters arc in a certain way. It normally is there's a climactic event 3/4 of the way through and then denouement afterward. It normally is a traditional patterned arc. And that's partly because of our format and partly because our editor-in-chief, Hannah Tinty, likes stories like that and thinks that a story written like that is most effective and most emotionally resonant. That said, with the addition of editors like me who prefer less traditional arcs and things, if an editor champions a story and it's accepted, I mean, an editor can champion a story. And so I don't want to say that we don't do any experimental, because that's not true. However, an experimental piece that's 5 pages long and is nothing but, God bless you, ampersands and pound signs for 5 pages can fit in a literary magazine that has other things in it, like a nonfiction essay or a poetry cycle or a photojournalistic essay. You can have 5 pages of ampersands and pound signs because it can be beautiful, like an art
Don't
thing.
feel encouraged by what she's saying about
You should absolutely submit to me today all of your pound sign ampersand stories. I will take them and put them in my bag, and we will publish them, I promise. No, but something like that, that's experimental in form and structure and format, which can be absolutely valid. Unfortunately, we can't use for this.
And then one more question about the magazine itself. So recently you made a decision, because last time I talked to you, it seemed that there was a deliberate decision that the magazine, even though you have a whole electronic, you have the whole internet presence of a very lively website, that the stories themselves are pretty much always this sort of tactile experience of reading a magazine. But now it's available on Kindle.
Right.
And I'm wondering why you made that decision, and if there's going to be more sort of movement towards electronic publication in the future.
We very hesitantly dipped a toe into that with the Kindle, and I am unfortunate. While I can talk about content and emerging writers, I am not the best person to talk about this because I did not have any part in the decision, and I don't have an e-reader or a Nook or a Kindle. I don't have any of those things, and I have a very watery understanding of how they all work because I do like tactile things. However, I do know that you have a subscription to Kindle and that you get the story a little bit earlier than male subscribers, I believe. Is that right?
I think some people in this room, Dave, you have a
Oh,
Kindle
Dave.
subscription, don't you? Yeah.
Ooh, am I right? Is that right? You get it a little earlier because I guess it's just easier. It doesn't have to go through the mail. What do you pay, like 50 cents every 2 years and you get 2 years of subscription? Is that what it is? Oh, it is? Okay. I mean, we didn't want to be technological prudes. So we wanted to, if we felt it was in keeping with our look and aesthetic and our philosophy, we are okay with that. We won't put our stories on our website. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But we felt like the Kindle was okay. We're being very thoughtful as we move along the process with what we're going to be a part of and what we're not.
And not available in bookstores.
Correct. It's subscriber based. If we were to do that, we would go out of business. It's actually way too expensive to be available in bookstores, and that's the reason that we don't do that. We have no political.
It's funny because
problem with that.
someone said to me, "Oh yeah, you can buy that at the bookstore," and I was like, "I don't think so."
The one
Yeah,
story? No.
Right.
No.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Because I might just close this, and then maybe people could talk individually to Marie-Helene for a while, and then we have to let her eat some lunch at some point. Or she will faint.
And please help yourselves
Yeah.
to these issues. Check us out. Number Station, both actually are issues that I edited.
Yes, that's why we have them.
And so come up and take an issue and see for yourself whether we're bullshit or not. Thank
Now
you.
we can turn off the mics and speak frankly.
Okay. Now I'm going to trash all the other literary magazines.